Welcome to today's Criterion Learning Series. Today we're going to be talking about performance reviews. And so thank you for joining us today. I do want to remind everybody that we do have a chat and a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to hopefully use the Q&A, but we're also monitoring the chat, so you can use that as well. I'm going to jump right into this because there's a lot that goes into the setup of performance reviews, and we don't have all day. So let me switch over to my browser here and we'll get started. All right, so you should be able to see my browser. So as usual, a lot of this is going to be happening within the setup of the system here. So I'm going to jump right on over to my setup. Obviously, performing the review itself happens here in self-service, and that's where you would actually do the review. But the setup, of course, is all going to be happening over in the admin side. So this has many different components when we're setting up performance reviews, and I'm hoping to touch them all, and we can talk about that. One of the very first ones I want to talk about is actually employee groups, because this is used when you go to assign people to the performance review. So you will want to make sure you have groups set up for this. So we have had a different training on employee groups that I would recommend you go back and refer to on this. So you'll need to have at least one group in here to do performance reviews. It could be a group like I have here for all my active employees, or maybe you want to break it down by department or job title or other criteria like that. So I'm not going to go into the setup of a group, but you will need groups configured. And I'm going to use this one called active employees when I go to my next thing, which is the workflow for this. So when you go down to workflows, you'll see one of the types here is performance review. So you'll see that out there. I'm going to go ahead and just choose with one called performance review, kind of generic there. And this is what we would use. We'll get to it when we get to actually like doing the review itself, but you'll need to have one of these configured to start the process for employees to do it. So members of the group that you select here are going to be eligible for that performance review. So when you're setting this up, it is a requirement that you're going to put a group here for this. And I'm not sure why group is not allowing me to see them. Let me just refresh here. It'll allow me to click on group there. There we go. So you need to have something, even though this is not a required field for performance reviews, you need to have this. Otherwise, you don't know who to apply the performance reviews to. So you have to have this here. Now, the rest of it, again, we've had training on these. So the auto action and the steps and so forth, I'd recommend we go back and review the video on that, or of course you can hit the help up here on that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, and you just need to have this set up. Okay, so now we're going to go into kind of the configuration of performance reviews. And you'll see here, there's 5 sections here. There's actually one piece that actually gets set up here under learning management, and there's another piece that gets set up under code tables. So again, as I mentioned, a lot of setup that's going to go into this. So let's talk about the code tables first, because before we can set up competencies and use them in reviews, they need to have a competency group. So that's going to be in your code tables. And I already have it open here, so you can kind of see what this is right here, where you set up the group you're going to use for your competencies. So I already have a few of them configured here. Let me just click into it so you can see how this is configured. It's very simple. It's really these 2 fields. This does not work right now. So cognition is the code. It could, of course, you use like a number or letter or abbreviation. And then the description would be actually what you see, of course, on the review, but also in the configuration of that. You may want to do it in other languages. If you have speakers of another language, you may want to translate that. And of course, it does need to be active to be used. So you'd want to make it active if you want to use it. So you can set up as many as you like out there to handle whatever it is you're going to be doing with your competency groups. And so I've got a few different setup here. You'll see cognition and communication. Those are the 2 that I'm going to work with, but you can set up as many as you like. You can, of course, set up one if you want to put them all together. All right, so let's look at competencies. These go on a review, and it's not, we'll talk about goals in a second, but these are, what you would score people on for their various competencies on the review. So I have a whole bunch of them that are already configured. And let me show you how this works here. Very straightforward. You'd click add to add the competency you want to do. You'll notice here, group is required. And that's why you have to set it up in the previous step in the code tables. So I would, once I have it configured, I can then select it from the list here. I'll go ahead and select communication as an example. And I'm going to go ahead and put in the name. So speaking in my situation, and then the description. Now, the name is kind of the header when somebody's doing the review. The description, there'll be a little icon they can click on to see the description here. And you can really put in whatever you want as your description. I'm just going to put in one sentence, but if you need to put a paragraph or two in there, as you can see, you have a pretty big box to type in whatever you like or to paste in whatever you like if you want to put in something very, very thorough. Okay, so really straightforward there. Again, let me add a second one just so you can kind of see, because I'm going to use two as I do this. And I just have this list off to the side that I'm copying and pasting out of. That's where you're wondering where my mouse is going. I have a list. So you can see how that works there. Very straightforward and simple. And I would go ahead and save that. So you'd want to set up all the competencies that you might be using on your review template before you go to your review template. It's not that you can't add them later, but might as well have them set up when you go to the next step. So you're going to want to go ahead and do that. Now, the next step actually requires a little bit of groundwork before you can set up review competencies, and that is rating scales. So review competencies is where you're going to add the various competencies you put over here, but they do have a scale. So if you want to score at all, you need to have a rating scale. It's not a requirement on the competency here, but you won't be able to score it without a rating scale in most situations. So you'll have to put in a scale right here, and you can have any number that you might want in here. I'll just show you an example of what a rating scale looks like here. So the scale name could be whatever you may want to call it. This one I've called 1 through 5. This is the top of the rating scale. So we always go with the higher number. So 5 is the highest score. So that's how that works there. So I won't be able to put like 6 as a rating because I put the rating limit as 5. And then I can add in the various ratings that I would like. Now I can do, if I want to do like 1.5, I could do that. So I could have more than 5. Actually, you can see I already have 6. I could have more. It's just that the limit, is 5. And just so you can see how this is set up here, when you put in a 0 rating, it does ask you if you want to consider this in the total score, because perhaps you do. Maybe you want to, they did very poorly and you want to include the 0 out of 5 in the score there. But if you're doing like I did here, where I'm saying it's not applicable, perhaps they weren't an employee long enough, or this particular competency or goal didn't apply to that person, you may want to say, yeah, let's just kind of ignore that in the calculation. And so we will not consider it. So if you want to include it, you need to check it. If you don't do anything, leave it unchecked. You'll see here, the rating and the name is required. The description is not required, but it might be very useful to provide some context about the name if you're not exactly clear on what that means. So here's an example of one with a description. You'll notice the other ones, I do not have one. It's not a requirement, but you may want to be a little bit more descriptive of what that score actually means. Okay, as I said, you can add as many as you like here. You'll see some example ones. Here's a pass fail where I am considering this in here. So maybe for your goals, you say pass or fail. So if they fail, it's obviously 0 out of 1. All right, so once you have the scales set up, you can use them in your competencies. You'll also be able to use them in your goals and on the reviews and so forth, but you can use them now in your competencies. So they need to exist up here before they can be used down here in performance reviews. So we do have a little bit of a separation there, because you'll notice that when I go to add a review competency, I'm not creating new ones here. I'm going to use an existing one from the learning management competencies up here. So I would select the one that I want. So I'll do that creative and innovative thinking that I just created there. And here you'll notice it's not a requirement, but I'm going to set a scale. I'll do that 1 to 5 that I just created, or I just looked at. And I'm going to go ahead and put in that speaking one as well. And I'll do a 1 to 4. just so you can get an idea of what that is going to look like. So as I mentioned, you do need to add these first before you can add them here. You can't add them directly here. All right, now the order that things happen, I could do company goals before I do these other things. I do want to talk about company goals. So what company goals are used for is you may want to say that all of the people who are doing this particular review, like maybe it was within a department or division or location, all are going to contribute to this particular goal. So they're all going to share the same goal. It's not a personal goal. So you'll see some I have set up here. Let me just click into one. So timely submission of reports is the name of this. Here's a description, just like the competencies, I would have a description there. And there you'll see, that it's active. Of course, I can't use it if it is not active. All right, so we'll see how that works there. So now that we have the company goals, obviously the scales and the competencies configured, now we can put them on the review template. And this, again, you may have several review templates out here that you're going to use, perhaps for different departments or something like that. So you'll see I have, I don't know, 10 or 12 of them already set up here. I'm going to create a new one just so we can kind of look and see how that works here. Okay, so the template name, let me just call this 2024 annual review as my template name. All right, so I like being descriptive in my names. So I have that right there. The description might be the same as the name, or you might go into a little bit more detail for the accounting department or something like that. So you could obviously put in more detail than the name. Maybe it's going to match up, but it can have more detail in there if you need to. All right, let's talk about these checkboxes over here, and then we'll look at the review score over here. So, of course, it needs to be active to be used. It does not need to be active to set it up. You can create one that's not active if you like, but when you want to go use it in the review periods, it has to be active. All right, is this a template you're going to use on the recruiting side? So when you do interviews, you can attach reviews to the interviews. So perhaps this would be the one you would set up for that. So recruiting template would be checked off right there. You'll notice when I do that, the goals go away because, of course, the candidates are not going to have goals. So that part goes away. All right. If you do it as a recruiting template, you can't use it in review periods. So it's one or the other. All right. Allow manual competency rating and allow manual goal rating. These are related. So this would mean that even though you have a review scale there and maybe like 1 to 5 or whatever, somebody could type in the score rather than using that scale of the drop-down menu. So perhaps that's how you'd like to do it. Same thing with goals. Maybe you want to type in the score for the goal rather than using a drop-down menu and a scale. All right. Would you like to hide the competency rating? So maybe you don't want to show that on the performance review. Perhaps people are too focused on like the scores and how that all comes out rather than just going through and answering the competencies and so forth. So you might want to hide that. And then down here at the bottom, maybe you want to hide the overall rating. So again, people might be choosing their scores and the competencies in order to reach a certain percentage. So maybe you want to hide those results so they're not seeing that down there at the bottom. And then do you also want to use these same hiding settings in HR? So when somebody's looking at their performance review in HR, you want to hide it from the admin. So those three are related. Obviously, if I do this, I don't hide that, it really does nothing. But if I do this and this, then it would hide it in HR. Okay, let's go down a little bit. We'll talk about the balancing between the competencies, personal goals, and company goals. So first off, it does need to equal 100%. I can't say 100%, 100%, 100% because then it's 300%. That doesn't make any sense. I'd have to put in like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. All right. I don't need to have anything in these. I could have 0 and 0. It doesn't mean you don't use the goals. Somebody might score them, but perhaps they don't impact the overall score of the review. And, you might say that, the personal goals are half of the score and the competencies are half the score, but the company goals are 0. Now, one important thing to note is If you put weighting on here and you don't have a personal goal or a company goal, it will consider that a 0. So let's say I did 1/3 in each, or 33, 33, 34, or something like that, but I didn't have any company goals. It's going to score basically the most you're going to be able to get is like a 66%, even if they max out everything else, because they're getting a 0 on company goals. So be aware of that. If you're not using company goals or not using personal goals, make sure it's a 0 here. Otherwise, you're going to have problems on the scoring. People are going to get low scores for something that's kind of not their fault. All right, so when you enter these in here, also you enter them in as a decimal. So 50% is going to be 0.5, not 50. So you do 0.5, right? Or did they change that? Maybe they fixed it. It used to be that way where I had, okay, so it looks like it has been fixed. So you used to have to put it in as like 1 for 100, but that has been corrected. I'm very happy about that because we were not consistent. Now we are. So ignore what I just said. Put it in as a 100 or 30 or 50 or whatever. So let's say I wanted to make this 80% and then 10%, 10%. You'll notice as I type these in, it's telling me like, hey, this doesn't equal 100%. And I won't be able to save it if it doesn't equal 100%. So I do need that to match out there, be 100%. All right. You do need to set a goal scale, even if you're not using goals. So, if you're not using personal goals, company goals, just put something here. Just choose your scale, even though you're not using it. But this would be the scale that's used for any goals that are on the review. So perhaps you do pass fail for those. That's what I'll choose. All right, and then finally, down here at the bottom is adding the competencies that you're going to use on this review. So you just click the add button, and you'll notice here it's going to show me all of my competencies that I have set up under the review competency, not just the competencies here, but review competencies. So if you don't see one and you're saying, oh, I know I set that up, check the review competencies that you actually did add it to the review side. That's where it might be coming into play there. All right, so you could check as many as you like in there. I'm going to check the 4 that I've added, but you could put in other ones, that maybe are applicable. What it will do is it will group them up. So I did 2 cognition, 2 communication. So these will be grouped together and these will be grouped together. All right, when I do that, here you go. You can see how they're grouped. All right, if I want to remove one, maybe I didn't want to have this one, I could trash can it and remove it. And then, maybe I change my mind and want it back, I can add it back. And then I do need to set the weight. You'll see here, I can't save. As soon as I add competencies, I cannot save because I haven't set the weighting. So this is the weighting within the competencies. Again, this must be 100%. I cannot save if it is not 100%. So if I do some bad math and I do like that, I can't save because it's only 95%, or I mess up and I do something like that. Obviously, when I have 2, it's pretty straightforward. But, some people might have a problem with this, or maybe they typed in 800 or something. You'll see down here, it's obvious. I can't click the save button. And if you did have 10 different groups, of course, scrolling, you might miss something. And, you meant to do 10 on each one, but you accidentally did 15 or something like that. So this is a really helpful tool there. Obviously, if I do less, it's also going to show me the same thing. All right, I'm going to make it even 50-50, but you could do whatever you like and you're waiting right there. So what this will do is it will score these, and then it will calculate the total score for competencies, and then it will do the weighting over here. So let's say I did really well on both of these, I got 100%, then it will take this and say, okay, 80% of 100 is 80, and then 10 and 10. So that's how that would work there. All right. If I do add a competency or I delete in a group entirely, again, I won't be able to hit the save button. I'll have to re-weight those in here. Now, if I remove just one, I'm okay because I haven't removed the group entirely. But if I do remove a group, I'll need to come back in and do the weight. Oh, I didn't put a scale for the overall score of this. I apologize. I was going to come back to this. So what this is going to do is when we come up with an overall score, using all of the weighting down here and the balancing here, it's going to calculate a score. So let's just say it's 90%. How do you want to compare that 90% to show an overall rating for the review? So remembering those scales out there, I'd have to look and see, all right, which one would show the description for 90%? So you may want a different scale just for the overall rating, because this is obviously, let's say I do this one, it's like every 20%. Well, if somebody gets 90, do you want to just show the kind of the 80% one, or would you prefer to have a little bit more granularity? So you may want to have a different rating scale for the overall score than you're using, let's say, on your competencies or your goals. And now I'll be able to save. Okay. Now, one key thing here is many times we come across people who they have reviews that are very similar between departments, but maybe there's just a few changes of maybe different goals, or maybe very similar competencies, but there's a couple extra ones in a certain department. So you'll see here you can clone. So what we recommend is kind of set up your template that is similar between all the departments, and then make a clone, and then make your ones that are specific to those departments. That way you're not having to recreate the wheel from scratch every time. You kind of have it set, and then, okay, I need to add or delete a competency for this department. So that is how we would recommend doing that. All right, so this button is visible. As soon as I check that box, you'll see this is visible. It's also possible to make one inactive like that. If I want to see any inactive ones, boom, I can bring it back. All right, I could also go in here and uncheck this as long as it's not being used. I am using it. So if I was not being used, I can uncheck it, and then it will be hidden from this default view, and you do that to show it. Okay, let's look at review periods. So this is actually applying the review into a period that you're going to have people go and do their scoring. So this is going to use that review that you have out there. Of course, I already have some out here. And again, I have the same thing with this showing inactive. Perhaps I don't care about that one anymore. I can remove it. And then if I need to see it back again, boom, I can see those out there. All right, so let's go ahead and add one out here for this period I just created. 2024 performance reviews, I think, as I called it. It doesn't matter. It does not need to match the template name. I'm going to use that. And then I'm going to come out here, annual review. So I will match it, but you don't need to. Okay. All right, so the period name is required. Obviously, the template you're going to use is required. You can't have a review without a template. Let's look over here, and I'll move down. So, of course, it needs to be active to be used. Is it going to be a 360 review? We'll talk about that here in a second, because when I do this, you'll notice I've got self and manager. When I do 360, I have others that I can add. All right, so if you want to, there's a few different things here. If you want to put the order of who is doing the review at a certain time, perhaps you want the peers to go first, and then the employee, and then the manager, you're going to need to check this box, and then, of course, add those people into here. If this is not checked, you can't set that workflow as far as who goes first, second, or third. So this does need to be checked for that to happen. And then you'll notice here, let's say I choose peer, self, and manager. I get this option to control task sequence. That doesn't exist if it's not a 360 review. So even if it's just employee and manager, you need to check this box to get this box to set the sequence. All right. Do you want to aggregate the reviews of these when you look at the overall score for this employer and show this detail on there? So this will kind of combine them into one review as the peers, employee in my situation, manager do it. I'm going to see them all together on one review rather than being separate reviews. That might be useful for you to have them together. If not, then you may want to not aggregate it. And you'll see here, you can show an overall aggregated score if you aggregate the reviews. So it can, look at all of these, and let's say there's 2 peer reviews, a self and a manager, it would do the math and figure out what the overall review is for all 4 of those together. All right, I am going to do this control task sequence so we can show you what that looks like. So I'm going to check that box. That allows me to say who goes in what order. All right, now when we include manager, we need to tell the system what org level are we calling manager, are we referring to when we have manager. I've made my system very simple. I only have 1, but you might have 4. So which one of those do you refer to as the quote manager on the review? It might be called supervisor or team leader or PM or something. That's fine. Just what do you refer to as manager in this situation. All right, which workflow are we going to use? So as I mentioned, I had to set that up first. So this is going to be the workflow that I'm going to use, that performance review one right there. All right, if I want to use project managers as peers in the review, I can specify which, similar to this organization here, field do I use to reference the project manager. What this allows you to do is if you have employees who work on projects and they're jumping all over the place and they're in a review cycle, maybe they worked on 20 different projects. Perhaps you want those project managers, those foremen, or whatever, to review their time working on the project because they worked with them maybe more regularly than their direct manager did because we're on site or something like that. So this would allow you to say, all right, the organization that we call project manager or supervisor or foreman, we're going to look through those people and add them as peers. So you can do this here if you, especially you're doing project work. When you do this and you get to the section of adding peers, you can even say how many hours did they need to work at that project in order for that project manager to review them. Because if they just worked there for 1 day, 1 hour, 6 months ago, the PM may have no idea who they are. They barely interacted with them. But if they spent, 200 hours there, okay, yeah, they spent a few weeks there, maybe a month and a half or so. So I probably know who they are and I want to review them. So you'll get that chance when you add the peers for that. All right, anonymous type. So you may want to set one or more of these as anonymous. Now, when you're doing this, probably makes a lot of sense to do it for peers. For self and manager and stuff like that, the employee probably knows who those people are, especially themselves. But you could, go ahead and say, maybe the direct reports. If I'm the manager and my reports are reviewing me, maybe I don't want to share who gave that negative review or that not so sparkling review of the manager. Self and manager are here if you want to do them, but you don't have to do anything, or you can just do one or whatever combination you want in there. All right, if you are, setting these anonymous types, who can see the actual anonymous names? So you might do peer reviews as anonymous, but you allow administrators to actually see who those people are. So you can do that right there. All right, and then what is the frequency of this? So this is how you decide, is this going to be one that's going every, certain amount of time? It's going to repeat, it's recurring, or is this a one-time event that you're going to do out here? So when I do recurring, you'll see I have different options out here than when I do custom. There's similar names. It's just that custom, you define the start and end date, and then the dates here is not recurring every X number of months. If I do recurring, maybe it's going to be an annual review every 12 months. I would do this. This would allow it to repeat every year or something like that, every quarter. So that's what a recurring is. When I do this here, I can use formulas. Perhaps I want to use a higher date or something like that, higher date plus 60, whatever. I could use a formula. You'll notice here, enter data as either a date using quotes or a formula. So I might do higher date as the start date, end date is higher date plus 90, and then the review date is higher date plus 91, and then the review deadline, the due date, is higher date plus 100 or something. I'm going to hard code it in here just to make it very simple. 6/1/2023. Let's do, and I'm just copying and pasting 531. I use the Control C, Control V to enter those in there. What's the review date? This is going to happen. I'm just going to use today, 27/2024, and I'll just stay into the middle of July. So this allows me to hard code these dates in there. As I mentioned, I might want it based off of like their higher date or some other date, so I could use a formula. All right, so this is kind of the basics of this. I need to hit save. And then to actually assign it, I go back in. So I hit save, and now I have some additional options up here at the top. The first one being, because I did control task sequence, now I decide what is the sequence. So I could put it in whatever order I want. I could say peers are first. You'll notice I can't have like two people at one. So I'm doing peers, self, and then manager. And here I could say, can they see the scores of the people that already went? So maybe I just want the manager to see the scores of the self and then peers. So I could do that right there. All right. And here are the employees that I'm going to assign to this particular review. I'm given some options here for this. So you'll notice add, I could select one or more employees. These are all people in that group in the performance review workflow. All right. I could do add to add one or more. So I could select like Chris and Ted and Charlene or something like that. I can also say, let's just add everybody from the group, which maybe you want to do. Or maybe I want to add a group within that group. So they would need to be a member of both groups, the performance review group that's used in the workflow, as well as a group that I select right here. So they have to be like, think of a Venn diagram, they have to be in the middle. I know we're right at time here, so I'm just going to select like 2 people. Okay. All right, so I added those people. Here you'll see the dates, 6/1 to 5/31, 6/27 to 7/15. There is no next review date because it's not recurring. All right, if I inadvertently added people, I can delete like that, remove them from there. Or if maybe I hit that add all and I didn't really mean to do that, I can do delete all. All right, if I click in here, I can change things if I would like. So maybe I wanted to override those dates. I could come in here and change those dates. And then you'll notice down here, where it added a self because Chris is the person, he's here, his manager is Ted. And now I need to add those peers because I added peers. So I would need to select one or more peers to do this. I'm going to say the CEO and this ticket seller are going to be the peers. If I had that project manager, I would be able to put in a amount of hours worked and it would automatically add peers. And then I could add others and remove if I needed to. All right, so very straightforward there. And of course, I can come back and add others. Maybe I want to kind of phase this in. I want these 2 people to do it and then, add the other people later on. I could do that. That does need to be within this date range. I can't add it in like August because it's outside the range. I could override the dates if I wanted that to happen, but that's, if I add them, it's going to be in July. Right, here's where I may want to set goals for those employees that are selected. Once they're assigned a review, they can also add goals in self-service and the manager can add goals to them, assuming you gave them rights. But here I might want to add a manual goal for one or more of those people. So I might say for Chris, I have this attendance goal. Use that as the due date. Let's just say it was 4/30/24, 100% weight. And it's for this review, of course. And we're going to use this goal workflow. So if you set up a goal, you do need to have a goal workflow in here. And then this would be the rating. I don't have this yet. So maybe the employee or the manager or somebody's going to score that. All right. You'll notice here I can import. This allows you to download a template and then you can import in goals as well. As I mentioned, you could have the employee or the managers do that. Once the review is assigned, they can set goals in self-service. And here's where I may want to set company goals. So come out here and let's use this one as a company goal, right? It's going to be, again, you need to set the scale or the weight, I should say, for this. And I will save. So as I mentioned, there's a lot that goes into the setup. We spent the whole time talking about that. When you assign people to have a performance review, it will send a notification when it's time to perform that review. So if it starts next week, they will get the notification on the day that it starts. Maybe it starts on Monday or something like that. They'll get that notification of that. It'll also look at that task sequence. So as an example, you might say, well, why doesn't Ted see it? Because there's peers first. Those peers have to complete it before Ted can complete his part of the review for Chris. All right, so that's how that works. It does go in order, and those 2 peers would need to complete it here in self-service. I don't have time to complete these now. I don't want to spend too much time covering this. So we're going to go ahead and stop here on the setup of this. I did see there was one question out here. Olivia asked that they were not able to see the reviews unless they went in and published them manually. Is there a setting somewhere to automatically publish them? I'm assuming you mean once they're completed and not just when you initiate them. Patrick is going to answer this. So I think he's answering this question here. I do see there were some other questions. Let me just look at these here to see. Question: if an employee changes managers after their interview is all set up, will the review transfer to the new one? Yes, I believe it does do that for the future reviews. For the current ones, I think you would have to go in and change it. So I'd have to come in here and change the manager. And what I could do is I could also just remove them and then add them back. If they haven't started the reviews, you could do that. Let's see. Can you have multiple reviews set up in Criterion, such as annual and 90 days? Yes, you can have as many as you like. And so somebody could have a 90-day review and an annual review at the same time, or maybe, 90-day review after they start, and then a year later it comes up and they do their annual review. So they can't even be actually doing them simultaneously. And you can set up, of course, as many review periods as you need to. People could be, like I said, they could be working on 2 or 3 of them at once on themselves or for peers. All right. So lots of great questions there. I wish I could have spent time on doing the actual review. Maybe we'll have a demo, a learning just on performing the reviews. That probably would be a good idea to maybe do that in August, a short follow-up on this, on actually doing the reviews and what you do afterwards. I think I'm going to add that to the schedule, and we can talk about that in August. So speaking on the calendar here, see there's more Q&A that came in. So I don't know, hopefully... do you need full site access to set the competencies? You don't need to be a full system administrator. You do need to have access to what I set up today. So you would need access to the learning management competencies, obviously the competencies here under performance reviews. You would need access to the code tables to set up performance review competency groups. So there is a combination of access you would need in there to do that. You don't need like a full system admin, though. You do need access to those things that I touched today. All right, let me look at my slideshow here. I do appreciate you sticking around if you were able to. We do have this recorded, so you'll be able to revisit this. I will add in here actually in August to do the actual self-service review portion of this and completing the reviews in there. So I'm going to add that in my schedule here. But here is the schedule for the next couple of sessions. By the time you join us on July 11th, you'll see the one for performing the review, and as well as the rest of the summer and into September. So compensation management is what we're going to talk about next. It is tied to performance review in a way, or it can be tied to performance reviews if you'd like to do that. So that's why we put it there. We're going to talk about how that all works there. And then we're kind of doing a special event here on the 18th of July. We're going to talk about our new mobile app, which will be available by that time. You do not have to use the new mobile app. Both apps will be available in the App Store, and you could choose which one you want to use. You could choose to use them both simultaneously. But we're going to talk about where we're at right now with the mobile app. I'll show you all the functions that are available on July 18th. And then obviously you're welcome to use the app and provide us some feedback on it if you'd like to do that. And then the 2 weeks after that, it will do that performance review. I don't have it here on the schedule because I just kind of did it on the fly, but we'll do the performance review self-service side and publishing them and stuff like that. So thank you so much for joining us today and for your great questions. We will follow up with you if there's a question that we did not answer. So if you do have additional questions, please reach out to us. You'll see our email address there, help@criterionhcm.com. We'll get back to you as soon as possible to any questions on performance reviews or other things that come up. So, whatever questions you might have there. Of course, you can also submit a ticket directly from the help menu in admin. If you are setting a performance review and have a question, email us, or you can click that little question mark button and submit a ticket right there. It'll also initiate an email basically, but it will start that ticket for you if you have any questions on that. Or if you're working with a partner, of course, you can reach out to your partner and they will be able to help you out as well. So thank you so much for spending the extra time with us today. I hope to see you all again in a couple of weeks.